Grab some chairs. We want all the chairs full. I'm Kathy Hansen, president of the Mojave Transportation Museum. We don't have a building, so we consider the whole airport a museum because it's been here since 1935. And it was actually a dirt strip built by Kern County to haul gold for the gold mine. And then General William J. Fox came here in 1942 and said, this would make a great auxiliary airfield for the Marine Corps. So it became Marine Corps Air Station Mojave in 1942. And the Marines were here, I think, until 59. When they went to Yuma. Anyway, this is the original tower. This building that we're in was the original administration building. And many of the buildings on the airport are the original buildings. There's still 2 original hangars. They built 5 hangars. And the swimming pool building is still here, and that's where they had the Gilbert Dunker, where they would put the pilots in all their gear in a seat. And the pool was really deep. And it was an Olympic-sized pool. And they put them way up and then turn them upside down and dunk them into the pool upside down. And that was to train them, and so that if they had a water ditching, because they were going to the Pacific, they would know how to recover. And so every Marine ace in World War II trained at Mojave, including Pappy Borington. And if you go to any event at the Stuart Witt Event Center, you'll see great big pictures along the wall. And there is a picture of Pappy Borington at the USO Club. Bob Hope was here. He brought his USO show to Mojave in 1944. So there's so much history here, it is a museum. But I am pleased to welcome our friend Dick Rutan. And I think of Dick Rutan, and I always think American patriot, war hero. He flew in Vietnam, flew F-100 Super Sabres, flew Voyager around the world. He flew his personal Long Easy around the world with his friend Mike Melville. And they had built those Long Easies side by side. They were the first to build. And what can I say? Dick Rutan is just known all over the world. And it is so funny, you can go anywhere in the world and you mention Mojave and people say, I know where that is. That's where Burt Rutan is at Scale Composites. That's right. And of course everybody knows about Spaceship One. But so many things have happened here. And Dick Rutan has been a part of the history. He took off from here in a rocket plane, the Rocket Easy, rocket powered, took off from Mojave's runway and flew to Cal City and landed there. I know it's a short flight, but the thing of it is, it was a rocket-powered airplane, and he set another world record. So please welcome the record holder and war hero, Colonel Dick Rutan.
Oh, good morning. Good morning. And thanks for coming out. And, this whole thing started just a couple of weeks shy of 40 years ago. And a little overpass cafe that's defunct right now. And we come up with the audacity to think that from this little airport and a couple of people with not 2 nickels to rub together, it actually double an absolute distance record. And the rest is history. Zach.
Yes, sir.
Come on in. Oh, yeah. Test pilot extraordinaire. Zach Breeder. I bailed out on this.
I'm gonna go grab Mike's in the restroom.
Okay, before I start, I want to get a special shout out. Not the book. The book it really took about 2.5 years for somebody, a group of people, small group of people who had never done this before. And we sat out on this journey to try to write a book, and it wasn't easy. I need to give a special recognition to Kelly Hall. Anyway, if it wasn't for Kelly, none of this would have been happening. And she's done the editing and take some of my scribbles and make them into something that's actually readable. And I didn't even think about it when we started because there's 117,000 words. And if you think about the English language and the opportunities to screw something up technical, it's vast. Anyway, my wife, Chris, and Kelly, they sat down and tried to if you have a book and there's a couple of technical errors, that's the only thing that maybe people really understand or that they can remember anyway. But anyway, thank you very much for coming. And special thanks to Kelly and my wife, Chris. And along the way, when you haven't done something like this, you always want to go and talk to somebody else that's done it before, somebody else's published book. And I want to point out, too, that Barbara Schultz has done a lot of these. And she went by and talked to Barbara about this and how to do this and what printers to get and paper and stuff like that. And those are all technical details that she helped out a lot. And I was just thumbing through the book right here on page 154. And there is a picture of Mojave, 1943. I thought, wow, the thing sure changed a lot. Anyway, so you got to buy the bar, right? It's off now. Anyway, Barbara does a fine job, and there's a lot of illustrated things back in the teens and 20s. And Barbara, where are you?
She's in the restaurant.
Okay, but anyway, tell her thanks, and this is really worth it. And she gave a lot of help to the book. I wanted to write a book, but I didn't really like how autobiographies were done. Because an autobiography, you spend a third of the book detailing these individuals where their parents met and great-great-grandparents met in Sweden or someplace like this. So I didn't want to do that. And it's not a book in diary form as a day-to-day events of somebody's life. And it really wasn't, the book really wasn't started out to be a typical diary, if you would. But as it kind of turned out, when we talk about the Voyager project, and we talk about some of the other things that I was honored to serve my country in some pretty exciting times, and some other things that we tried, some of them worked, and some of them didn't work. Like the balloon, it took off on a balloon out here in Albuquerque a while back, and we were going to float in the jet stream around the world. And we worked really hard on that, and we got up to 30,000 feet, and the thing blew up, and we ended up bailing out over to New Mexico. So sometimes it's not, my mother says it's not a crime to fail. It's a crime to not try. And to try is really the important thing. And while I'm thinking about that, the flight of the Voyager, the idea was spawned by Bert, and it was Bert and my girlfriend, I forgot her name. Anyway, we met over in the Overpass Cafe, over a lunch over steak teriyaki. That's just a joke, by the way. And steak teriyaki, and we were trying to talk him into doing an aerobatic airplane, and he says, dream big, go for something big. And he sat there that day, 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago, and said, why don't you try to fly around the world non-stop, non-refueled? And At that time, the B-52 held that record, the Stratoford. They flew halfway around the world. And not only 3 people in the high desert of California, in a little desert town, was going to have the audacity to try to not only break that record, which in itself would have been quite a challenge, right? Just to break that. Wow. But not only break it, but you had to double it. Okay, now that's the journey we set out on, and the journey was very difficult. The bar was set very high about what we can actually accomplish. And so along the road to do this, you're going to run into a lot of challenges. And the book talks a lot about the challenges that we faced and how we dealt with them. And so and it's encouragement to dream. If you got a dream, you can accomplish anything you can dream, as long as you just work hard and don't give up. So a lot of the book details some of those challenges that we did and how we tried to overcome them. And basically, I don't know what happened. A couple of terrible things happened, challenges, broken, whatever challenges that were met along this 5.5-year journey. And there was a lot of times they said, this is impossible. Not only is it impossible, but it's damn well dangerous. And the one saying that my brother says, it's really classic, and he says, be very careful how you use the word impossible. And that states it all. Be very careful how you use the word impossible. What is impossible? So you want to challenge yourself, knowing that, and here's another reason a lot of people fail in some of the things that they try to do. They have dreams and they have the talent and the capability to maybe exceed some lofty goal. But what happens to all of us, before you start, you have to sit there and know that you can solve all the problems along the way. And if you can't solve all the problems along the way, you don't start. Well, that's wrong. And my mom also says, if you can dream it, you can do it, and the only way to fail is if you quit. She says, don't worry about anything you can do nothing about. I took off in Mojave that day, or from Edwards Air Force that day, and I looked at the wingtips, and they were all shredded off, and I'll show you that in a minute. And they were talking about that was really close to rupturing one of those outboard fuel cells, and if that happened, we would die. Then there was no way to control the airplanes. So I looked out there and I thought, there's not a damn thing I can do about that. So I'm going to stop worrying about it. Don't worry about something you can do nothing about. I mean, what's the point, right? Another thing, this thing turned out to be very dangerous. And there was a lot of times during this road for the Voyager that I thought that not only was it may fail, but I had a good chance of dying in it. And just before the flight, I started to realize there were probably 99 volunteers who came to give their expertise in engineering and weather and long-range communications and engines and a myriad of other things, technical things that were really required to make that flight successful. And I thought if Gene and I go out there and we disappear like Amelia Earhart, there's a lot of people who are going to feel really bad. And some of them, maybe a lot of them would think, God, it may have been my fault. And they would be very sad that they worked all this time on a failing project. So just before the flight, we made a death tape. And the tape, we call it a death tape. And the reason for the tape is that I wanted to have all the volunteers together in a room, and I wanted them to play a tape by Gina and I in case we died or we didn't come back. And the message was, number one was, it was right after the Challenger. Remember that stupidity? They went and killed the 7 astronauts. I call them murdered them for what they did. But it was a big disaster. And that's bad. And that's really sad, but these people were trying to do something. They took a risk to advance technology and whatever. And that's a lofty goal to do that. They should be honored. But the survivors of those 7 astronauts all got together and they hired a bunch of lawyers, to sue the government that they gave their life for. And that, to me, it just incensed me. I just thought that was really terrible. for them to do such a horrible thing. So anyway, we set a camera up on the end of runway 12 up there, and it was pointed down the runway. And so I thought it would be a little Cecil B. DeMille's thing. So anyway, I set the manager up, and he started the camera, and then I told him to leave. And Gina and I, we walked into frame and walked up to the runway, right up to the camera, and it was a two-part message. And one of them had said, it's really too bad that this didn't work. But there's one thing that nobody should ever do. And if any of you even think about getting an attorney and suing somebody over this, Gina and I will haunt you, your kids and your grandkids through eternity. So don't disgrace this program by doing something so audacious like that. Everybody here, including Gina and I, we knew that there was a high-risk thing, and we were willing to take it. And if people don't do that, we'd still be looking at the ass end of an oxen sitting on a covered wagon trying to get to the Oregon territories because somebody thought they could do something better. Now you go from St. Louis at 0.8 block and comfort in the stratosphere because somebody thought they could do it better. But the main message that we wanted to get through to the people is, he says, I'm really proud. When I said it to them, I said, I'm really proud of every one of you, that you came and you tried. And you shouldn't be sad about that. You should be goddamn proud that you came here on this day and tried to work on this program. And don't any of you ever think that maybe it failed because of something you did. Don't even think about that. You should be proud of that. It didn't work, but you should be proud of the fact that you were here and you tried to do something like that. So take that with you. And then I parted it by saying, I'll see some of you sooner, and some of you later. And then we turned around and walked down the runway and walked out of the film. So that was the message just before Gina and I took off to do that. Thinking about the volunteers and stuff and how they would feel about that. Another thing, we tried another one. We took off in a balloon, tried to flow around the world, and we're going to fly over 25,000 miles, and we leveled off in the stratosphere. And bang, the balloon envelope ruptured, and we came down and we bailed out and landed in a cholla cactus patch in eastern New Mexico. But we tried. It didn't work. It was ironic because one of them was a poverty program. This one didn't have any money. It was all volunteers and donations, and thousands of people came and give their talent in the airport, give us a nice hangar tomorrow to do all this stuff. So it was an effort by a whole lot of people. The other one was fully funded by some billionaire, and one of them was successful, and one of them didn't even get out of the county. So I stood up in a cholla cactus patch with needles all over my face, and the guy says, well, what are you going to do now? I says, well, this is the first day of our second attempt. And it's a character development, right? Yeah. Especially since we got beat by a Swiss watch company. Anyway, there's only one major milestone. Anyway, the main driver to maintain the motivation to try to go through all these problems is that to deal with them, insurmountable problems, fighting with my brother, not having any money, the volunteers that don't show up, some of the challenges for building the airplanes and flight testing them. And some of those points that is insurmountable. It's like herding cats in the emotional state. And I'd sit at Hangar 77 by myself. I'd sit down on the ground with my back, and I'd look out over the high desert north of here, and I'd close my eyes, and I would try to imagine what would it feel like to land at Edwards Air Force Base, having accomplished aviation last first in atmospheric flight. And I'd think about that, and I would think that would feel pretty damn good, right? And And that was a motivational device that would get up and do that, and get up and hammer at it. Another thing I'd do with the insurmountable problem is get an old blue and go up one day and look down. And if you look down from the sky at the earth and the problems, down here looking at them, they're really huge. But if you look at them from the sky, they get really small. And like Mom says, don't worry about it. If a problem comes up, just frickin' deal with it. So there's a lot of that in the book about motivation and goal seeking. The book was not written as a technical thing. Chris, when I was first going around to give my talks, you know, we're engineers and technical things, and I feel that it's really important that all the audience know precisely how the systems work, how the fuel worked, and all the other things, technical things. And then Chris listened to that a couple of times, and she says, Dick, you know, nobody gives a crap about how many fuel tanks it had. She said, tell them what it felt like. And so that's the main part of it. You know, what was in your heart at that time? How did you feel? And try to do some of the emotional things, like the challenges. I don't know if I may not have told anybody this because it was a big secret that I kept. That if I'd have told anybody at the time, that would have been the end of the Voyager project. And I'll share that with you today. You may read about it for the first time in the book, but it's kind of interesting about the human factors and the strain. Remember, it was 2.5 years in flight testing. We flew 68 flights in this airplane. We had all kinds of horrible flying quality programs. Not that Bert screwed up, but Bert had to achieve this incredible range of 29,000 statute miles. And that is, if you let that number settle on your memory a little bit, that's one hell of a long ways. To achieve that, there's incredible compromises in a lot of areas. And I'll share this one thing with you. Everybody knows what a phobia is. There's people that have phobias that they stay in their house and they can't go outside. Closed-in spaces. You know, there's probably 20 or 30 recognized phobias. And I always look at that as it's a mental thing. And I says, you know, what a bunch of pussies. You know, you let something stupid like that debilitate you. That's really silly. Now, I've always had an edge phobia. You know, we go over the edge of a cliff and look down and it get really scary. Or one of my big thing, and Jeannie used to tease me about this all the time, that I couldn't ride in a glass elevator. I have to stand in the back and not look outside, because when it would lift off, and I'd just go berserk. But I thought that was normal. You know, everybody has a fear of heights. You know, why wouldn't you? If you fall, you're going to get hurt. And I knew about phobias. In fact, when I was going through prisoner of war camp, I would piss off the guards so they would put me in the box. That was a horrible little thing with a V down there, and they'd stuff you in there. But this was in Fairchild, and it was in February, and it was really cold. So I'd piss off these guards, and they'd say, "Okay, Rutan, we're going to throw you in the box." "Oh no, don't do that." I'm thinking,
Bear rabbit?
So bear rabbit. So they stuck me in there and locked the door, and I would curl up and I'd go to sleep. And that even pissed them off more. But after probably about 5 years into this program, with all the challenges and stuff we had, I took off in my airplane, Old Blue. Right out here in runway, it was called runway 25 in those days, because the North Pole changed. Magnetic. Anyway, I took off, climbing up, and I made my first turn right over Mojave. Those of you flying here know what it is. And as soon as I banked the turn, the aquaphobia hit me really hard. The fear, it was uncontrollable shaking. Your heart was racing, your skin was cold and clammy, and you were absolutely debilitated. I mean, just flat debilitated. And so I leveled the wings real good and tried to bring it under control. And then I tipped the wings a little bit more, and the thing hit me. Almost totally debilitated. And it took the airplane and skidded it around and made a crash landing almost. Hardest landing I ever made, scuffed the tire. on runway 30 and barely got the airplane back on the ground. And it taxied in and shut down. Now, this was my program, and I was supposed to be the pilot to do this great flight around the world, this major milestone in history, and I can't fly. Number one is I knew damn well I couldn't tell anybody about that, but it had to be fixed. So I was sitting in a bar in Las Vegas right after that. Don't know how we were there. But for some reason, I was sitting there, and a guy come up and sat down beside me, and we had started a little conversation. I found out he was a psychologist. And you know that he ran a fear of flying clinic. People that fly that would have an aquaphobia or a fear of flying when their skin was cold and clammy and they become debilitated with shakes. And so I says, oh, really? I says, well, tell me about your clinic. And he told me about how long it was. And I thought, you know, I need to know everything about this program. And so for some reason, I started asking questions. Of course, it's not about me, it's about Jake, whatever. And so he was more than willing to tell me the details of his program. And boy, was I taking mental notes. And the long and the short of it was, I took what I learned from him, the psychologist in a bar, and cured myself. And it wasn't easy. The step-by-step program that you'd have to go through to control the uncontrollable shaking, skin cold and clammy, the shakes, just unbelievable fear. And I cured myself. It took a long time, probably about a good part of a week or more, to go through the different procedures and stuff. And at the end of that, hey, I wasn't feared of anything. Now I could ride glass elevators, I could hang out over the Grand Canyon with one hand. Then it's kind of scared me. I thought, wait a minute, you're supposed to be afraid a little bit. So anyway, I never told anybody about that. You know, who would ever fly with me again? Would you get in an airplane with me as pilot in command, sitting there knowing this freak could have a phobia meltdown right in front of you? Well, it didn't happen again. But anyway, that's one thing one of the challenges that we had. Another thing that was interesting was after the balloon flight, and the balloon crashed and burned, and the ballooning community never did accept us as balloonists because we were interlopers. We weren't real balloonists, and that really pissed a lot of these people off that we were going to go after a ballooning record milestone, and we weren't balloonists. Anyway, any balloonists here? If you talk about a self-serving clique that look at everybody else in disdain, those are they. And there was a lot of criticism from that community. But there was one guy, his name was Jake. I'll call him Jake. I don't know what his name was. And over the emails and stuff back and forth in this little balloon group, he was really critical. And he says that Rutan gave ballooning a bad name. And it was just really terrible. So he went on, and finally he come up and he says, normally you just ignore that. Yeah, I mean, you would too. But he came up and he said something. He said, they can teach a monkey to pull a rope, but only Rutan can bail out. Now, parachutes and balloons most of them don't even think about it, or they don't take parachutes at all. But this monkey, Rutan, can pull a rope, you know, fly the balloon, pull in a rope. But only this monkey can bail out. So what I said to him, and I wrote back and I answered him, and I said, Jake, he says, in my life I found that there's generally two types of people. Those that get off their ass and try, and those that sit on their ass and criticize. And I think I know which one of those. Touché. The post-Voyager flight, it was interesting. Jane and I, we were all of a sudden injected into a different world that we were not prepared for. And if you get involved in entertainment industry and Hollywood and movies and books and stuff like that, we were just two little sharks, two little minnows floating around in a big pool of sharks. And that was a really interesting thing about what happened. The so-called managers that were supposed to take care of us, and we caught them, and we found out that we had to do actually get a lawyer. And I found out that the legal industry was a bigger thief than the people we were going after. And so one day, after all of this and depositions and stuff, I finally stood up and I said, you know something, I didn't work this hard. And we didn't do this. And I don't, if you've ever been in lawsuits, it's just a horrible emotional thing. I said, I didn't do that. So one day I stood up and I said, God damn it, why do I feel this way? I should feel differently. I should feel happy about what we accomplished. So I called the lawyer up and I said, John, you're incompetent and you're fired. All I want you to do is write a letter to all those people and tell them whatever they stole from us they can keep. But I don't want to hear from you, and I don't want to hear from them ever again. And then I realized the only thing that was important on this whole thing, and that is, and I thought to myself, that I can go into our nation's capital, I can stand in the National Air and Space Museum underneath an airplane that was built by somebody that had a vision, that wanted to work really hard, and a lot of talent that came together for the reason of trying to be involved in this milestone. And I look up at that airplane hanging and the only thing that mattered was I look up and it says, I built that son of a bitch and I flew it around the world. And none of those guys could take that away from me. And I realized, in reality, that's the only thing that really mattered. All the rest of it didn't matter a whit. And so, with that, I walked away into a new world that didn't involve lawyers.
Tell me what happened when you were going to install the Voyager in the Smithsonian.
Well, that story. The National, or the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, they have a long history. And it started with the Wright brothers. And for some reason, the Wright brothers, to put their airplane, they had a big problem with the Smithsonian. That's not the Air and Space people. These are the people that are in the castle, that run the whole museums. They come from a different world. The world of arrogance, and a couple other things I won't mention. But the Wright brothers, the first airplane to fly, they had such a problem with the Smithsonian that the first 7 years of that historical airplane resided in a museum in London before it came back. Same problem that Charles Lindbergh had. Because when I was a little kid, I says, wow, I want to go and meet Charles Lindbergh. And this great famous airplane, look what he did. So I was really wanted to go to the National Air and Space Museum, and I walked in there and I says, well, where's the Spirit of St. Louis? And I looked around and they showed me where it was on the map. And I walked into this room and it was medieval costumes. Medieval costumes. And I looked up and his airplane was hung in medieval costumes. And then we came along. And first of all, that was one of the motivations. It said, hey, you're going to build an airplane and fly it, and it's going to hang in our nation's capital, in the National Air and Space Museum, in the Milestones and Flight Gallery. Well, right away, I got a call from the Smithsonian, and they says, hey, Rutan, you got to stop calling this a milestone, because only we can determine whether it's a milestone. We haven't done that yet, so we demand that you stop saying that this flight was a milestone. So I asked him a question. I says, hey, when all you people, you sit around the table, tell me what criteria you use to determine whether this is a milestone or not. Tell me what the criteria would be. Of course, they didn't want to answer that. Another thing that happened is that there was about just after our flight in Japan, there was a big design conference. So all kinds of designers were going to be there, and they had some of the Soyuz things, and where they joined up was going to be there, and some other design artifacts. Of course, at the top of their list, because the Voyager had such notoriety at that time, they said, they came to us. It says, we want your airplane at the design conference in Nagoya, Japan. And here's a whole lot of money. When we landed, we were $500,000 in debt, plus a lot of obligations to a lot of our sponsors. So we were deep in the hole. And I looked at him, and I looked at the money, and I said, you know, we didn't do that to take this historical American artifact and haul it all the way to Japan. So I told him, I said, hey, we have a museum in our nation's capital, and it's open 365 days a year, and it's free, and any of you people from Japan want to come and visit it, you're certainly welcome. Well, they wouldn't get to take an answer for that. And they followed us around from airport to hotel to try to talk us into that. And we says, no, we're not going to do that. And in 1987, the Oshkosh Convention, I formally turned it over to the National Air and Space Museum, and they took it for the truck that took it from here to Oshkosh, and I turned it all over in a formal ceremony to the National Air and Space Museum. And one of the main criteria that I had with them was that this airplane will be displayed only on the mall in the Milestones of Flight Gallery. Another thing, I offered them my book for sale, the one Gina wrote, called Voyager. And I offered it, and they took the book and sent it back to me, and he says, this book does not represent anything in our historical artifacts. And I thought, what? What? So they refused to even sell our book then. So I says, okay. So the Japanese, they went to the Smithsonian. Guess what? The Smithsonian was glad to accept their money. And since they owned the airplane now, they would be honored to send it to Japan. Okay, well, you don't piss off fighter pilots too much. So Gene and I, we went and had a little meeting with them, and we told them in no uncertain terms, he says, look, there were 99 volunteers that volunteered for this project that made it all happen. And we've already contacted ABC News, back then when ABC News had some credibility. Sorry about that. Anyway, ABC News was going to come, and Gene and I, we were going to handcuff ourselves to the airplane as it hung in the Milestones of Flight Gallery in the Smithsonian. We're going to handcuff ourselves to the landing gear, and the volunteers are going to block all the entrances, and ABC News is going to come and film this. And not only that, Scott Crossfield, Scotty, he was working in the Science and Technology Committee for the United States Congress, and he drafted a letter that was signed by 54 congressmen. 54 congressmen. And he sent it to him, and what the letter said was, he says, these airplanes are not yours to go and send around the country as you feel fit. He says, you have been given the responsibility and the honor of maintaining and displaying America's aviation artifacts, right? And the F word, you know what the F word is? Well, if you don't know what it is, I'll tell you. It's fine. There's no fine way they're going to do that. And in the conversation, the F word, explicit, when we talk to them, they say, F you, Rutan, this is our airplane and we'll do with it what we want. And then I got Scotty to write the letter, and they basically told the Congress to go to hell too. And then we threatened to handcuff ourselves to the landing gear and then call ABC News. Well, they basically F you and threw us out. But then, for some reason, they decided to designate an envoy to Nagoya, Japan. And this envoy went to Nagoya, Japan, and when they came back, they made their report to these people, and it says that, gee, we've looked at it, and we've determined that the streets of Nagoya are too narrow to accommodate the Voyager. Therefore, we're going to turn that down. And so they built a crude replica, and since that was kind of Gina's thing, she was going to have a museum, which she never did. Anyway, she was involved in that. Anyway, that replica now hangs in the International Terminal in Seattle, Washington. SeaTac. Maybe some of you have seen that. That's not it. It's the crude replica. So anyway, I won that, but anyway, we were not endeared. We were not endeared to the Smithsonian. And we had some words. But I thought, you know something, hey, I'm in pretty good company. I'm not the first one you guys had problems with. You know, we all remember what they did to the Enola Gay, the World War II guys. They were going to take the Enola Gay and put it in the mall with rocks and encourage people to throw rocks at that historical artifact as an anti-nuke protest. And all the World War II veterans damn near lost that fight and got the guy fired. Almost lost that fight. So I figured we were just in good company. By the way, the Smithsonian just informed me that they're tearing down the building and the Voyager will no longer be displayed on the milestones of Flight Gallery. They're going to put it out at Hazy, the Hazy Museum at Dulles. And they were talking about that when I gave it to them to start with, and I told them, look, there's no way. If you guys want the airplane, it has to be in the mall. Now they're going to renege on that, and we're kind of, the fight continues, I guess a little bit.
We got room here.
What's
We
that?
have room out here.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any other story?
Oh, navigation. Who planned the navigation and what time did they decide? How did they decide on what?
That's a good question. What? Who decided the navigation? It was an extraterrestrial who did that, and his formal designation was the god of weather.
Yes.
The weather god was going to determine it. And that's a good question about how we're going to deploy this thing. Most time pilots, they're going to say, okay, we're going to fly from here to here to here to here, and you take that to the weatherman looks at it, the time and altitude, and he figures out what the weather's going to be, and he tells you, and then you get in the airplane and fly it. The Voyager was not deployed that way. The Voyager was deployed to fly in the equatorial trade winds. And if you've never heard of that, I had neither. But the equatorial trade winds are at the equator, within about 5 or 10 degrees of latitude from the equator. And at low altitude, under half atmosphere or 500 millibar, there is a river of air, like a snake, that goes around the world the wrong way, backwards. Northern and southern hemisphere, the prevailing winds are from the west to the east. The storms come in over Seattle, they tear up Chicago, and then they go out to sea, and that's generally how it works. Now, that's the trade winds, right? You ever wonder why the hurricanes come the wrong way? Okay, well, those things are spawned, those hurricanes are spawned over the jungles of Central Africa. This huge thunderstorm. And that river of air picks those things up out over the Atlantic, and they gain energy, and they ravage our southeastern coast. Now, the same thing that takes those hurricanes the wrong way, if you would, is the same thing that we did. We took off, we went south, picked up the equatorial trade winds, and their job was to keep us in the center of that and not fly through any thunderstorms, because the airplane was very frail and fragile. I mean, that was a joke, really. It was even worse than that. Now, wherever that was, when we took off, every 6 hours, the weather guys would work for 6 hours, and we actually had all 4 of the world's weather geosynchronous satellites. The 2 American, the Japanese, and the European GOES, they call them at that time. Funneled right here to a trailer. By the way, the trailer is still out. It's still out in the boneyard where that happened. And it saved Elliot's life.
Yes, it did.
Because when he crashed out there, our trailer, our mission control trailer, was there to cushion his impact. And so he's still alive thanks to the flight of the Voyager. But every 6 hours they were going to look at all these satellites, and they were going to determine where that river of air is and how it moves around and snakes around. And so the thing to them was, look, there's no line on the map. If I catch anybody drawing a line on the map, we either had to re-educate them or throw them out, metaphorically. So, and the only criteria was keep us in the center of that flow, because if you're going at Piper Cub speeds, boy, a 10, 15 knot tailwind is like, oh man, boy, that's just really great. So he was going to determine the route. And the other thing is to keep us out of the bad weather. Convective weather that would tear the wings off the airplane. and you will give no consideration to political overflight or air traffic control. You try to get, just think about it, in Central Africa, you're going to try to ask them for permission to overfly all those countries. And I tried, and I figured that that would be more of a challenge than building the whole airplane. So then I determined if they weren't going to kill us, I'm not going to ask permission. We're just going to go. They're not going to kill us. What are they going to do? They can be angry, and they did. One of them I found out 15 years later that I was ordered in Uganda to abort. And I got that message 15 years later. If they don't like it, here's my address in Mojave, and they can write me a nasty postcard. So if they were going to kill me, anyway, maybe that was a little arrogant, but I wanted to make sure that this thing was not put in jeopardy from a political overflight or some air traffic control requirement. Another thing, we did not want anybody to know where we were, because there's always somebody going to come out and mess with you. And if you're flying an airplane that's very controllable and it will come apart, and if somebody flew in front of you, just the prop wars would just maybe damage the airplane or actually destroy it. So we didn't want that. So I told Mission Control where we were. Mission Control called air traffic control on the telephone. We had one hell of a phone bill when we got back. On the phone, and they made up anything that made them happy. The thing was, call them up, get the routing that makes them happy, but for God's sakes, don't ever tell them where we were. So whether you agree with that or you think that's arrogant, whatever, but anyway, that was the philosophy of how we deployed the airplane. And it was basically around 10,000 feet, plus or minus, because we had to be at low altitude.
Were you hot?
No, 2 miles high in the tropics is perfect. That's where you want to be. Anybody else?
Why'd you name the book The Next 5 Minutes?
The next 5 minutes. There's been a lot of times, looking back on this, I realized how many times there were when I was looking down a runway or in some type of, and wondering what the next 5 minutes of your life was going to be like. And the book opens up, and I tried to describe, after 5.5 years sitting at the end of the runway, after a big fight with my brother about fuel load, with 25-30% more fuel had ever been on board the airplane, much less flight tested. And looking down that runway that morning, and pushed the power up and released the little teeny brake that we had on the nose wheel, and I couldn't but help wondering what the next 5 minutes of my life is going to be like. So I thought that was a good name for a book. Also, there's been many situations where you thought, gee, I wonder what the next 5 minutes of my life is going to be like. Like crashing at the North Pole in a Russian airplane, and the balloon blew up and we're coming down. You wonder, gee, I wonder what the next 5 minutes. Or coming off the target in North Vietnam on fire in my jet, wondering what the next 5 minutes and if I can make it to the Gulf of Tonkin or not. And that was just a few of them. And if you're a test pilot, some of you, where's Zach? He's done that for Bert and Dano and some of you test pilots. If you're sitting in the runway and you're going to fly an airplane that's never flown before, and if it's a Bert Rutan design, it's really weird. So then the wonderment, it's the same thing. Another thing about aviation's hallowed ground is just next door. I call it aviation's hallowed ground, the Muroc flight test area. If you think back in the 50s and 60s about all the people that died trying to develop a really safe transportation that we all enjoy today, its safety is bar none, that all of that came at the sacrifice of a lot of brave people out at Edwards, a lot of smoke and holes around here.
Maybe a good time to show the video.
Oh yeah, she says get on with it. Okay, call the one up about the one that has about the bathroom. Yeah, that one right there.
You want to come up?
Expanded. I found out that all the talks that I've given about this program, that one of the first things, and then they realized that there was a cockpit that was this wide, it was this deep. And the length of it was from my head on the back engine firewall and my feet up against the instrument panel. That's how big it was. And he says, "You spent a week and a half in that? How did you?" So I gotta be careful. Anyway, I'll use a scientific term so I won't embarrass anybody. And I think the common usage of this science is, how did you tinkle and duty? Anyway, there's a funnel here, and there's a tube, and that aluminum tube was stuck out the bottom of the airplane, retracted. Because the thing as big as your little finger, that may not be significant on a local flight, but if you're flying a week and a half, that little drag could be a significant thing to make the difference. Anyway, we're supposed to remember to put that tube out every time you use this tube that was yellow before we took off, and, except once. Gina wasn't too happy about it. Okay, I'm an advocate of it's not fixed until it's flight tested fixed. You got to test it. If it's broken, you fix it. It ain't fixed until it's flight tested fixed. Okay, I violated that one thing because this thing. Now this thing here is a quart plastic bag. It's got a circle, and it's got the white plastic, you peel it off. Now this is a medical thing, and in the medical industry, the aggressiveness of the sticky stuff on that is quite more aggressive than your Band-Aid that you put on your arm when you were a little kid. But I never did test that on the ground. The only thing we were concerned about was, since it was a pusher, if we dropped it, would the hit the fan? And we tested that. We had ripe bananas in little sandwich bags, and we dropped a bunch of them out at different speeds and configurations, and it was comfortable about that would actually clear the prop and it would be not a problem. So if you're out in the desert and you see a plastic ball, whatever. So we're confident of that. But I never flight tested. And then the first time I used it was on the 4.5-day flight where we broke a closed course distance record by the B-52 and got the airplane in the record books as an absolute record. And Gina became the first, and to this day, the only female to ever hold an absolute record. God, 30 years later. Now, well, you're going to try to imagine this, but anyway, don't dwell on it too much. This is quiet. Janie would put a little privacy curtain up, but there was not room for that. Anyway, laying on your side with your knees all the way up to your chest, we were going to take the plastic away and expose the sticky stuff.
Yeah.
And what I realized at that time was that the target of the center of that ring was at the bottom of a very significant crease. And try to maneuver that. No, anyway, once that's done, and you try to remove it, then it would bring you back to a fond memory of childhood when as a kid, scraped elbow when you try to remove a Band-Aid from your arm. And all of us determined the method of removing that. Well, let me tell you what, it's a hell of a lot more aggressive than it ever was on this little kid's arm. But once you clean up with the thing that I had in my hand, that the weight mass ratio was way off than what we tested. And I knew that there would, I wasn't going to take a chance of it hitting the fan. So then we carried it with us in a special compartment. Okay. Okay, call up the why don't we tack this one here just for a second real quick, because you asked about the navigation thing. See what we did here? We left California and headed southeast to get into the equatorial trade winds, which is right there. So we tried to stay in that all the way around the world. And that was basically our route, off Sri Lanka, Central Africa, Costa Rica, and then back up.
So did you gain of 2 days by going that direction? One day.
Save?
Game.
To answer your question, you can do the math on your own. But the airplane flew 26,000 miles. 358.4, whoever's counting. And we averaged a 20-knot tailwind. So our weather guys did a really good job. So 20 knots in a Piper Cub tailwind, that is significant. That is really significant. However, that all happened until we left the equatorial trade winds right here in Costa Rica. And we started up
Headwinds.
to get out of those things back to California. And then we ran into really bad turbulence and strong headwinds all the way from Central America all the way back home again. So if you're sitting there in a Piper Cub speeds with a 35-knot headwind, that's agony
Next
for a fighter
time,
pilot.
start at
They're used to
Panama.
driving around at supersonic
You
flight.
could start at Panama next time.
So, anyway, the last day and a half was really critical, and I detail that in the book about what happened to us. And the worst thing of the whole program, all the way around the world, and it happened that far from home. That we damn near lost the whole thing right there. Okay, let's run the movie. I sit at the end of the runway one day. By the way, where were you 33 years ago on this very minute?
Watching
Okay,
you.
stop it. Dolly, where were we?
30, gosh,
On the 21st.
yeah, that would have been day number 8 of the world flight.
Yeah.
So we were answering phones from all around the world. They would call, and a phone call came in from Germany, and the guy says, because it looked like you guys were going to get back in 9 days, but we always thought the flight would take 2 weeks. So he says, why are they coming back early? So I told him, because Gina didn't finish her Christmas shopping. And so that's the story in Germany.
So the other one was somebody called about Santa Claus. What did they say?
Oh, Katrina Muma, she came and brought them pillows for comfort, and she was 3, and asked them not to bump into Santa Claus.
Bump into Santa Claus.
And now, 33 years later, she's married and has 2 small children after a lengthy career in the Air Force.
And I think we were probably down coasting in Costa Rica. Boy, was it nice to be back in our hemisphere. They welcomed us with open arms. Boy, this, I think if we'd have landed in Costa Rica, they'd have given us the key to the whole country. And after being in the other part of the world where they didn't even know who we were and chewed me out for making joke on air traffic control about leaving California and going to California, then, and it was very, it was really gratifying to make it back, knowing that we had no chance of making it on the first attempt. And I even wrote that in a sealed envelope. It says, hey guys, it's 3 attempts. We'll make it on the 3rd or later attempt. That was my prediction. And I just wanted to get it over with. You know, the first failure, second failure. Now we had a chance of making it on the 3rd. And the fact that we were going to make it, and when we found out that we did have enough fuel to get home at the very last minute, it was unbelievable that we were going to make it on our first attempt.
Kid,
What?
you didn't even think you would make it at all. You thought you would die in that airplane. That's what
Well, we sat on the end of the runway that morning. And we're going to show you the video of it. And I looked down the runway and I said, Dick, there's probably no way that you can survive this. The fragility of this airplane is all frail. The wings are all bent down. The fuselage is bent down and twisted. I couldn't even get the canopy, the entrance door in. And it was really strange that morning. I tried to put it in, and it always just popped in, and you do the little latches. And I could help part of it up with my hand, and then I started beating on it. And I'm sitting here thinking I'm probably going to be dead in the next 5 minutes, wondering how in the hell am I going to be here? And then I thought, prudently, I'd shut down the engines, get up, and walk south out in the desert, and I could be alive the next day. But then I looked over to my left, and there was all these volunteers sitting over there. And I thought, after what I told them that we were going to do, that I would quit at this point, legally. without any question that they would have the perfect right to commit premature euthanasia on a cowardly bastard that totally deserved it. And I thought, there's no way I can get out of this. Then we're stuck. But it was funny, but my arm wouldn't work. I kept thinking, if I hit it hard enough and it pops in, but if it doesn't, I can still live. And I was looking at my hand and my arm wouldn't work. And I stopped and I said, what's wrong, my arm? Look. Then I realized this, you know, the subconscious psychology of that thing. I said, okay, arm. Bam, and it popped in. Okay, there was mixed emotion, right? Damn. The argument with my brother that morning about the fuel load, and I overrode it and put in about 300 more pounds of fuel. And Bert thought we could get airborne with. And Bruce Evans, he was another key player in this whole thing.
Oh, God, he was fabulous.
About made it work. He was the crew chief, and you'll see him here in a minute. But he snuck in 54 pounds of his own. You know, there was another thing. Just before the flight, there was a little guy showed up, and he was about this tall, and he was an older guy, and he had a leather jacket on that was so warm, and it looks like he was some guy right out of the 30s. And the guy walked up and he says, "My name is Doug Corrigan, and I want the honor of touching your airplane." He says, "There's 3 airplanes in the world worthy of my touch, and I want to touch your airplane." And Doug Corrigan was the guy that welded the fuselage on the Spirit of St. Louis down in San Diego. And I said, hold it right there. I called Bert, I said, "Bert, get your tail down here. Doug Corrigan's here." Wrong way, Doug Corrigan. Anyway, that was really a neat thing to talk to him. And Bert was convinced that he was going to make him fess up, that he knew all the time that he was going the wrong way. And of course, Doug Corrigan has been telling that story for eons, and he started the same dialogue, just like a record. And I said, "Bert, there's no way you're going to get him to admit that. He's going to take that to his grave." And he did. But that was a real character. Another thing real quick, I'll probably forget, is that in 1924, and Barbara has a really neat picture in here about that. 1924, Douglas World Cruiser. And the Douglas World Cruiser, they built 5 of them to be a race around the world. It had an incredible range of 1,200 miles.
Yeah.
But the only trouble is they only went 80 miles an hour, and they could only fly in the daytime, so the maximum range practically was 600 or 300, whatever. And so, but anyway, it's the most incredible flight in the world. It took them 6 months and 69 landings, and I don't know how many thousand Liberty engines that they wore out. It's an incredible ship. That's true. We dedicated the Voyager in the Smithsonian. It was a black tie affair, and in spite of what the Smithsonian, there was a very nice induction ceremony. And there was one guy that was there, and his name was Lee Wade. Anybody ever heard of Lee Wade? Barbara knows Lee Wade, because Lee Wade was a pilot of the New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm sorry. He was a pilot of the Boston. He was a pilot of the Boston, and he was there. And he was in his 90s, and he was, boy, in good shape, and he was just as sharp as a tack. And I found out he was in attendance. And I thought, man, alive, I got to meet him and spend some time. So we stood in front of the New Orleans, one of the airplanes. It's on display in the Smithsonian, and got to talk to the guy that did it first. Did it nonstop and unrefueled. Wow, what an honor that was. Went to Quartz Hill one day after the flight, right after the flight. Was going to get a haircut. And brother-in-law came in there and he says, "Hey, there's a really neat barber shop down there. It's a real old-time barber shop. He's got one chair, and he loves aviation. Got pictures all over the wall in aviation. He gives a really good haircut, so why don't you go down there and get a haircut?" So I said, "Yeah, that's pretty good. Need a haircut." So I drove to Quartz Hill and walked in there, and sure enough, there he was. Nice guy, typical barber, right? One chair, pictures all over the wall, and you knew that aviation was going to be spoken in this facility. So sure enough, I sat on the chair, put the cape around my shoulder, and I says, to start the conversation. I says, wow, you got a lot of pictures here. You like airplanes? Oh yeah, I love airplanes. Been here all these years, and I watch all the airplanes out at Edwards, and I got pictures of them, and followed all these airplanes, and it's really good. Then I looked around and says, hey, what is that one over there with the skinny wings? And he says, oh, that's the Voyager. The Voyager, you said. So what's so special about that? And he says, well, it flew around the world. I says, around the world, you say? Really? Then after a couple more clips, in a very, very quiet, he looked around, very quiet and authoritarian voice. He said in a low voice, he says, that I have it on good authority that they did not actually go around the world. Really, you say? They didn't actually go? He says, yep. He says, when they took off, they scraped the wingtips, and right then they knew they had no chance of making it around the world. So they went off the coast of California, and they orbited around for 9 days and came back and claimed that they had flown around the world. I says, really, you say? Even after the haircut was over, took the cape off, and there was a photograph of Jane and myself on the wall. So I made a point to go over right next to the autograph, and I paid him, and he never caught on, and I never told him. Okay, I want you to appreciate what it was like at 8 o'clock on December 14th of 1986. We're sitting at the end of the runway. The engines are running. There was a frost all over the wings, and the Air Force had some heaters, and they were trying to melt it. But it took a delay to melt the frost off the airplane, and both engines were starting to work. Liquid-cooled engine in the back, the air-cooled engine in the front, the cylinder head temperatures and the oil, they were right up next to the red line. I says, come on, guys. Knowing that if we had to shut down, it would take a couple, 3 hours to cool the airplane off before we could restart. Come on, you got to do this. So I was agitated about the guys. Anyway, the defrost was melted. And we had an agreement with my brother, and the big argument, and to get him off my back, I swore in a blood oath that if I didn't have 68 knots at midfield, that I would abort. And we had an acceleration profile. You go by a certain point, got to have so much speed. But the last time to abort was midfield. Since the airplane had no brakes, other than a little tiny nose wheel brake, that maybe we could stop before the end of the runway. And that was his concern. And to get him off my back, I says, yes, Bert, I'll do that, not a problem. I guarantee, I appreciate, anything I could say to get him off my back. A blood oath that I would abort. Knowing in the back of my mind, I'd been at this damn thing for 5.5 years, and I was bloody tired. I came out here to fly around the world, and I don't care if the damn thing was on fire. Keep going. That was in my mind that moment. I looked over at Rocket Ridge ahead of us, and I looked to the left, and I could see the snow-capped mountains of the Sierra Nevadas. And off to the right, the San Gabriels that had snow on them at that time. And I looked at all those people out there. Now, don't worry about anything you can do nothing about. Now, like in combat missions, a real bad combat mission, you worry about it ahead of time, and you get kind of nervous. Or after you land, having survived whatever it is, then you may realize what you've been through and walk over to the edge of the ramp and throw up. That's a metaphor. Okay, the same thing. But I was concerned about a lot of this stuff, fighting with my brother and so forth, and we finally boarded the airplane, and when my butt hit the seat, I became a pilot. And all you pilots know exactly the same thing. There's other things going on, but when your butt hits there and you start doing pilot things, seatbelt, canopy, fuel selector, magnetos, all of that stuff, all that goes away, and you become a pilot. That morning, you can see some people standing at the end of the runway as we taxi lumbered, as the airplane first started to move down the runway very slowly. And one of them was Bruce Evans. And I asked Bruce, I said, Bruce, what were you thinking about? You, more than anybody else, knew what the situation was that morning. What was going through your mind that morning? And the airplane disappeared from his view over the end of the runway because it's kind of curved. And then he heard the dialogue about wingtips scraping and whatever. And he says that he thought we'd crashed, that we didn't make it. But that was the feeling at that point. Now, Gina's job was to call off airspeeds. And Bert needed to know the airspeeds as we were progressing down the runway. And airspeeds for liftoff and airspeeds for climb and so forth. That was her job. And my job basically was those engines are overheating. And I wanted to make sure that as we accelerated down the runway that they started to cool off. Because one of the nightmares I had was to get this airplane airborne and with power wide open trying to stay airborne, and all of a sudden you see all the temperature gauges getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And the feeling is that you can't recover the airplane and the engines are going to fail to be overheated. That was one of my big concerns, among a lot of other things. One thing was that the airplane became more and more difficult to fly. 75% at the last test flight, that the hand fly of the airplane took 99% of your concentration, because the airplane would start into a porpoise. You let go of the control stick in less than 15 seconds. If you let go of the control stick, the airplane would disintegrate. So you had to be on it to stop this divergent oscillation. So you're really sensitive to try to fly this airplane to keep it from oscillating. That was in my mind that morning. Another thing that was on my mind is that I didn't know that if I could control the oscillations going down the runway, because the dynamics of it sitting on the ground was a lot different when it was supported by the wings. And I knew that there was a big problem about being able to control the flapping of the wings as we accelerated down the runway. And that's why I did not pull back on the stick prematurely to get the wings off. Although that Bert and Mike were screaming at me, you got wingtips on the ground, pull back on the stick. Now, they were down, and my mind was that they're down and they're stable. They're stable, so I'm just going to leave them there. All the other flights, the nose is up, and you start rolling, the wings always came up. Every one of the flights, the wings would come up. But that morning, with the extra fuel and the boom tanks pointed down, it twisted the main wings down. And none of us caught it. None of us realized that the boom tanks had untwisted the wings from lift to lift, but in the wrong way. Halfway down the runway, both wingtips were being ground away. And but they were stable. And then at the end of the runway, I reached down and grabbed the stick and thought, gee, I wonder if I can even fly the airplane. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, Dick, did you, I'm assuming you had no way to defuel. You say you had an engine failure on takeoff or something, and you had no way to defuel and come back for a landing, is that correct?
That's right. Okay, here's what that's a good question. Real quick. Now, we did not have single engine capability for 3 days. The first time that the airplane was light enough to fly single engine was over the Philippines. We had done the total Pacific Ocean. Okay, another, darn. Oh, about dumping fuel.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the scenario. The two boom tanks, big boom tanks out there, had a ton and a half or more, a lot of fuel in them. Four boom tanks, aft boom tanks. And I said, Bert, how do we jettison fuel? I mean, if we lose an engine right after takeoff, we got to lighten the load a lot. And he says, what I'll do is I'll put a tear strip on the bottom of each tank. And you can pull a cable and it'll rip the tear strip off and put a big hole in the bottom of the tank, and the fuel will just come out. See, and then you'll be light enough and you can fly the airplane single engine, right? Does that sound like a reasonable thing?
You can't go anywhere though. Back to land.
No, I mean, you're going to abort. But there's a lot of opportunities to abort. Okay, so being Dick, he always asks the question, you know, what could possibly go wrong? And so the first thing I ask, I says, well, Bert, what if I reached up and pulled those cables, and 3 of them, the tear strip came off, and 1 didn't? And Bert says, well, you're dead. Okay. I says, okay, we're flying along and everything's just fine, and the engines are running good and everything's really cool. And one of them, one tear strip just vibrated or whatever and ripped off, and dumped one tank right there. And he says, well, you're dead. Now, a lot of times, if you have some safety procedure or protocol, you got to really be careful because it may be more dangerous than what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
So I look at all those conditions and I says, we'll take a chance. Answer the question?
Yeah, it did. One other question. Where are the two winglets today that came off the airplane?
Okay, good question. Where are the winglets today? One of them is in the EAA museum because there was a lady right in the outskirts of Lancaster, and she was watching it on TV to take off. And then she walked outside. She said, oh, there's the airplane. It's flying right over her house. And you'll see the wingtip, you'll see that winglet come off on the movie. But it fluttered down and landed virtually at her feet. And she's waving, and he says, wow, those people are really friendly. They sent me a note. And we got that on video, and you can see that. However, halfway to the water around Santa Paula, the mountains there in Santa Paula, the other one came off on its own.
Oh.
And it fluttered down, and to my knowledge, nobody's ever found it yet. But we
No,
were...
I heard that somebody did find it. I was flying in a chase airplane right below the Tiger,
Uh-huh.
and the Tiger had to do an abrupt maneuver like this. Boy, you're out in front, okay? And then the Duchess was over here in front of me off to the right. And the guy had to do with the Tiger, because it came off and went right down. And I watched it go down.
Well, then you could go right out and find it.
And I did, but somebody found it about a year or two later. They're out there in the riverbed where all the brush is growing,
Right,
all
right.
and they said they found it. I thought you knew that.
I did not know this.
Oh, okay. Somebody told me they
That's
found
one
it.
of them. That's one of the two things that I do not know.
Maybe they
And it's good. I didn't know that anybody ever found it. If they could bring it, we could have it in a museum someplace.
Right.
Good play.
Okay, you ready for this
Yes.
big event?
Yes, ready, let's see it.
Okay, there's Bruce Evans.
That's Bruce.
Look at the boom tank is pointed down.
Yeah.
Never seen that before. And it didn't dawn on us what it was going to do to the main wing. There's Ferg Fay. He hand-propped the back engine. And it ran for a week and a half.
That was a wonderful one.
Liquid fuel, right. Other than the fact that I ran it out of fuel the day before we got home and it windmilled for a while. But that wasn't its fault. Now they come in, those people were standing there, Ferg Fay, Peter Riva, a couple of people that were part of the program. And I often watched this and I thought, I wonder what they were thinking. What were they thinking that morning?
Those wings go down. 110
Oh
feet.
God, look at the wings.
Yeah.
It gets worse.
There's no sound.
Really slow.
Tell them the wingspan, Dick.
110.
Before we rolled, it was about 110 feet. And when we coasted outbound, it was 3 feet shorter than that. Okay, the wings are down, and about that time, you can tell that the airplane is pointed into the ground, not flying. Okay, all the acceleration checkpoints were all coming out negative. First one was a 1 knot low, 2 knots, and midfield, the last abort, the one that I promised my brother, that if I didn't have 68 knots, I would. And at midfield, I called 68 knots. Nobody said a word. Everybody knew that Dick was not going to quit. I wanted this damn thing over with. Decided, oh my God, look at that.
Oh.
Now, pretty soon you'll see the ILS glide slope for the other end of the runway go by. And then the magic number. Gina was calling out at airspeeds, and right at the critical moment, she squeezed the mic button, and she held it down. And she kept calling speed, but nobody could talk to us. And there was some information that I needed that I couldn't get because Gina had the thing down. And just after I rotated to lift off, I had to go over and knock her hand off so I could communicate.
Wow.
Look at that.
Wow.
Okay, that cold December morning,
Yeah.
95% of the world's longest runway. The Voyager lifted off, it accelerated in ground effect to 100 knots. As soon as I opened up the mic button again, I told him we had 100 knots, and Bert was apoplectic with joy. If you hear the dialogue, he was screaming, "They got 100 knots, they got 100 knots!" And I didn't think they would do it.
He was crying.
That's what he said, but it was kind of a rhetorical statement. Now we're out over the dry lake, and I wonder if I can even climb. It started out 50 foot a minute, I would have been ecstatic, right? You would be too. It went to 100 feet a minute, locked onto 100 knots, 200 feet a minute rate of climb. I looked at the rate of climb instrument and I thought, I could not believe it. It got almost at 300 feet a minute. I could have outclimbed a Cessna 150. The thing was, could have taken more fuel. Okay, there's one thing about taking fuel, and I retract the nose wheel with the cable underneath the instrument panel, and Gina has to crank up each one of the landing gears individually, which would take her another 10 minutes. But the thing about the extra fuel, because the heavier the airplane is, it takes more power. It takes power. So if you took 304 pounds of fuel, you could be best to only realize that at end of mission, maybe 12 or 14% of that fuel would be available as an additional fuel, because it takes fuel. And Bert argues with me, he says, "Hell, Dick, you'd have made it anyway." I mean, who's to argue? There were so many things that happened that could have made it go either way during the flight. And now she will crank that landing gear. It's a little tiny thin cable. It goes out there and she has a little winch and she kind of winches it up. And the uplock, well now look right here real close, drove the airplane farther than faster than we'd ever flown before. And since the rudder power was so benign, I would try to yaw it, but I couldn't make it yaw very much. And it finally ripped that other wingtip off. And the other one came off by Santa Paula.
East of Santa Paula in the riverbed there.
East of Santa Paula in the river. I didn't know. Now, there's a big piece of carbon fiber that flapped in the breeze all the way around the world. The tip running lights, about 3 feet of the wires, they were streaming back and forth. And I looked out there and I saw that, and it says, "We're going around the world." Climbed to 6,500 feet. We put W in the compass. And in 9 days, 3 minutes and 44 seconds, there's W in the compass. I looked up Edwards Tower. This is Voyager 1. I'm about 20 minutes south. And I don't have permission to get in the restricted area, but would you let us in, please? And I don't want to interfere with any of your traffic, is what I said. And if you just let us in, I'll land, I won't interfere with your traffic, and I'll land in a remote area of the dry lake. Now, even though Bert had told me about all the crowds, for some reason in my dulled mind, I didn't even equate. But I was always worried about getting back in the restricted area. We'd gone to the restricted area half a dozen times during the program. However, if you say the magic word, Mayday, 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 they have to let you in. This time, we weren't in a Mayday situation. The tower operator came back and he says, "Voyager 1, this is Edwards Tower." He says, "Sir, we have canceled flying for today and we're all here waiting for your return." And then I thought, they canceled flying for this little home bill? This is multi-million-dollar military contracts and stuff. They canceled flying? This is ridiculous. And the whole Antelope Valley was covered with an undercast. And I flew right to the edge of that, and the undercast ended exactly at the restricted area. So we had to stay fairly high. And when the clouds came back and I looked at that beautiful, we can run it again if you want it. Yeah. I looked at that beautiful runway that we used a week and a half before, and then looked over at the whole western end of the dry lake where tens of thousands of people and cars and stuff came to greet us. And we circled around for extra 20 minutes to make it an even 9 days. Finally, we had 9 days, so I went out and didn't put the gear down for the last time. Big B-52 pattern and landed on aviation's hallowed ground. And the compass rose, taxied up in front of everybody, and shut the engines down, and let the FAI certify the airplane. And I was sitting there, I put my head back and closed my eyes, and thought it felt every bit as good as I imagined it would all those years ago. Dreaming you can do it, and the only way to fail is if you quit. Somebody else had a question real quick.
Yeah, how much fuel did you have left?
How much fuel did we have when we got back? We took off with 3.6 tons of fuel. We're going to land in that dry lake about so many miles west of here, and never have another opportunity to do it. And the nightmare was that when I landed short, no matter how close, you were still short. You did not complete. You're not authorized to have a world flight. Hell of a record.
How
You don't
close,
get credit for the
how
miles.
close to your start point did the rules say you had to land?
At the same airport.
Oh, at the same airport.
Yeah, I mean, that was more or less understood. No, if I'd have landed down in 29 Palms or something, it would not have counted. And there'd be a lot of people around reminding me of that, too. Great record, but not a milestone.
You would have violated your clearance.
Well, the last thing I was worried about was ATC clearance. Another thing, there's another real critical thing about how this was possible, and it's the freedom that our flag affords us, and that is that in this country, the only country in the world that would allow a civilian to build an airplane that violated all these rules. And our government says you can have research, that you can have experimental. Now there's amateur built and some other thing, but there's one shred out, and it's called research and development. And that is the most precious thing that we own in this country, the freedom to try, to fail, and even the freedom to bust your ass. That is really critical. And the only thing that the government has anything to say about your airplane. See these numbers right here? 12-inch letters. And right beside them is the little numbers. And we wrote that on there, and the inspector came in and says, "Hey, you got to have 12-inch numbers." I can fix that. And you have to have an experimental sign on the entry thing. Well, we already had that. And the only thing is, and this is a reasonable thing, that you have to be in a remote area for test flight. Obviously, it would be foolish to allow test flying over downtown LA. See, that's reasonable. That's it. That's the only thing they can say. The guy walked out of the hangar, he walked around the airplane and sat down and filled out the 2 precious pieces of paper, airworthiness certificate, that my government could not have been more accommodating. They didn't give us any problem whatsoever. In fact, I says, "Well, how am I going to get out of my test area to fly around the world?" And he says, "Okay, I'll give you a 1-mile wide corridor from your test area to the ocean. You fly out that corridor, and I don't give a damn what you do after that." And it hit me. What a precious thing that is. That's why there's 2 sets of numbers on that airplane, because I leave the other ones on there as a reminder about living in a great country.
There's a question there.
Yep.
How was the air inside the cabin for 9 days?
Okay, the air inside the cabin for 9 days. It was perfect. Even though you're in a subtropical area, 2 miles high is perfect. It was nice and warm during the day, and in the nighttime, since we're a liquid-cooled engine, I just tapped off part of the heat coming off the radiator and plumbed it back into the cabin. So I was never uncomfortable. Never.
What about not taking a bath?
Oh, well, take a bath.
What about that here?
Okay, that's an excellent question. What did you do for hygiene? It's really fun with the kids. And the kids, of course, they want to know how you tinkled in duty. But then I remind them, I says, "How long have you gone without a bath?" The kids. Of course, they all want to outdo themselves. And the kids send them and say, "Well, I went a whole month without a bath." And then I asked his parents to stand up and be recognized. And no, but hygiene was interesting. Doc Julie gave us a medical kit, and in the medical kit, it was sealed. It had a seal on it. And we could only open that and distribute what was ever inside under the authority of Julie. Gina had a big problem with her neck, and she had altitude sickness, what is it called?
Hypoxia.
Not hypoxia. What is this when you're at altitude?
Mountain sickness.
The bends.
Mountain sickness. What's that called?
Arrhythmias?
No. It's a thing where your lungs clog up or something.
Bends.
The mountains. Anyway, she had a lot of that. And she would get nauseous, and sometimes I could smell her vomit, but she never complained at all about any of that. And I knew that she was really hurt sometimes during the flight. But what was in there was mainly for her, I think. We took no stimulus, because the stimulus wears off after a while, right? So no coffee or anything like that for stimulus. Oh, yeah, the hygiene. Okay, you ever go to eat some ribs and they have a little Kim wipe thing? And you peel it off and there's a little nappy in there and it's wet? Okay, they're really cool, but did you ever, when you clean them up, they got this sticky residue on it? Ever seen it? Yeah. It's really terrible. So Dr. Julie came up with a thing, it's called algicide, and it's an extreme antibacterial fluid. It's kind of greenish, and it's liquid, and it's just the consistency of water. So he made up little Kim wipes per day. So once a day, I would take the headset off and clean up the headsets, clean up my face, and try to clean up the upper torso and the groin area at least once a day. And that stuff was wet, but it would evaporate without any residue. And so that's how they controlled the bacteria or anything like that. But I can imagine that the smell is something that you habituate to it. Ask the astronauts. Apollo landed out there and they opened the door. SEALs, when they opened the door and they took a whiff of what was inside, some of them fell off. But you habituate. You see the question about Dr. Judah and what he did? Then there were some other things about hunger and thirst and how the body reacts when you're in danger and stuff. All that's in the book. We talk in detail about how we learned a lot of that stuff the hard way.
Well, a lot of people believe in you. Have you ever thought of fundraising for a new experiment?
Fundraising for a new experiment?
Flying cars or anything? Good.
Well, let's see. I haven't thought about that for fundraising. Somebody has a dream of how they can do a flying car, and they ought to do it. And we raise our own money for the Voyager, and I guess they can raise their own money too. No, I'm just kidding. But that wouldn't it be neat to not have to fly over these clogged, beat-up roads to be able to fly? Yep.
Anybody else verify the Voyager?
Oh, Voyager. Who is he? In fact, he's right down outside it.
Yeah, right there.
Mike, come out and present yourself.
Mike Melville is there.
Now, Mike Melville,
Mike.
as all of you know, he flew Spaceship One for the first time.
He's
He's
our
the world's
first commercial astronaut.
first civilian commercial astronaut.
Hey, Mike.
You selling
Mike
books,
is the
Dick?
only other pilot who flew the Voyager.
You're gonna sell me a book?
Aye, aye, Captain.
Yeah, okay, super. And I want you to sign it too.
Please, thank you.
See,
I'm
Mike
gonna send
would,
it to my sister.
Oh, buddy, she'll love it.
Yeah, she will.
I want to give you something, Dick. Thank you for coming. And it's aviation oriented, and it has a picture of the U-2 on it. This is a special labeled wine. It's a little Cabernet, but it's celebrating the U-2. And I know your son-in-law flew these at Beale, but I thought you would like that.
Thank you very much. Again, I want to recognize the work that Kathy has done to set up these things, and you should all be very grateful and give her a nice hug.
Thank
And
you.
also my lady, Kelly Hall.
Kelly's gonna take our
Oh,
picture.
and, yeah, Kelly Hall and my wife that did a lot of the editing on that book.
There we go. Thank you, terrific. But enjoy the wine. I just thought that was appropriate.
That was
I've given him
appropriate.
plain crazy hats and shirts and everything else. This is something he can really use. But thank you all for coming, and everybody come and buy a book.
Okay,
Oh, Dirk, I've got raffles here of baskets. Christmas baskets with a bottle of wine and wine glasses. There's one big basket and it's full of cheeses and chocolates and all kinds of things. And then there's a small basket with a sleigh and it just has a bottle of wine and 2 Voyager glasses, wine glasses. But Christy here is selling raffle tickets, so
Well,
if you
do
want,
you want to just do it now, like have somebody pick it and get the winner?
well, let's sell some more tickets first. They're $2 each or 3 for $5. Did you bring the tickets in?
No, I thought we were just gonna do that.
No, I wanna make money for the museum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Kelly's my friend, she knows, we're like.
Really good. Best advice I've ever had. And he says, I got the runway in front of me, I got the gear down, and I can explain everything else.
That's good, that's good.